Welcome to the Jared Show WisdomPodcast. In this episode, we'll talk about perception and perspective. We'll use the definitions to get a good grasp of what these terms mean, then get a bit deeper to gain insight as to how perception and perspective can affect our lives. Perception and perspective. In the previous podcast, episode number 1, Knowledge versus Wisdom, we covered the attitude of gratitude perspective. Let's start out again. 3, 2, 1. Perception and perspective. In the previous podcast, episode 1, Knowledge versus Wisdom, we covered the attitude of gratitude perspective. And that is a great perspective to have, by the way. But we want to get deeper. What is perspective, and how can we gain or shape it? How does perception, or what we perceive, play a role here? First, let's start with perception. What we perceive about the world around us. We'll move into perspective, and how we react to that perceived world out there, whether real or imaginary. Once we have a firm understanding, we'll move to how these two things can be positive and productive, or negative and harmful. And welcome back. Let's start with a working definition of perception. Perception, the ability to see, hear, or become aware of something through the senses. A good working hypothesis of this would be, or a good working example of this would be the normal limits to human perception. The second part of this would be the state of being or process of becoming aware of something through the senses. A good way to understand is the perception of pain. A way of regarding, understanding, or interpreting something, a mental impression. A good way to say that would be Hollywood's perception of the taste of the American pub. So, in the first episode, Knowledge versus Wisdom, we went over how knowledge comes from the 5 senses, from outside of you. Right? Perception is much the same. It comes from out there. But it's much more than that. Perception is more like the floodlight. Right? So if you imagine if you've ever had a house that was, maybe you lived in the country, or maybe you lived in a neighborhood that was really dark, didn't have a whole lot of streetlights. Usually had a floodlight, and that floodlight was bright, but it really gave a lot of light out in a very big radius, right? And it was a huge radius. That perception is much like that floodlight. It's a big radius. It's a big feeling, right? It's a general feeling about the world, or a certain theme, if you will, pertaining to the world. We're going to get into examples of perception and perspective here in a little while, and how those two things tie into each other and how they feed off of each other, actually. But think of perception as the big floodlight, whereas perspective is the big searchlight. Actually, the great philosopher Alan Watts talked about floodlight and searchlight when it comes to unconscious and conscious. Here we're using it to understand how we perceive the world and how we perceive that the world views us, right? So that perception actually can be shaped or taught or learned through osmosis. And osmosis is basically the quality of learning by having something rub off on you, as you could say. There's more technical terms to it, more scientific ways of explaining it, but that's the general gist of what osmosis is. And that's kind of how a lot of us learn our perception of the world, how we view the world looks at us, whether it be ethnicity, whether it be our class, or how much money we have, or really how people look at other people in terms of, let's say, stereotypes. If you live in the country, if you live in the city, the world is against me mentality or victim mentality is a great way of understanding how that perception can rub off from, let's say, friends or family or siblings or co-workers or whatever. If you're around that, they say if you're around a barbershop long enough, you get your hair cut. If you're around a particular perception of the world, that perception of the world will start to rub off on you, whatever that perception may be. It may be that the world is a horrible place. It may be that the world is an amazing place. But that perception itself, it can also be changed, whether through environment or people you surround yourself with, or even perspective. We'll get into that in just a minute. But in order to change your perception of the world, you have to understand where it comes from. That perception can come from your environment, where you live, and the way that your small town thinks, and the way that you think, or the way your big city thinks, and the way that they move and they do things. We do gain a lot of insight, and we kind of naturally take on the tendencies and the ideas of those around us because it's easier. At the heart of who we are, we really want to be able to fit in. It's actually imperative that we fit in certain aspects of life. Strength in numbers idea that if you're alone, you're vulnerable and weak. If you're within a group of people, you have strength in numbers and you can be protected or protect very easily, that kind of thing. So your environment, the people you surround yourself with, your environment itself, let's say you live in the country. That environment comes with a specific stereotype. You can think in terms of a slow-paced lifestyle, right? Your environment, say you live in New York City, that environment comes with a fast-paced lifestyle. And that, in turn, shapes your perspective, or perception, your perception of the world, that the world is passing you by unless you're moving at the speed of light, right? The same thing can be said with the people that you surround yourself with. If you surround yourself with people that, let's say, are pseudo-intellectual or like to spout off at the mouth and think they know everything, or you surround yourself with people that really don't care about themselves or anything around them, or you surround yourself with, let's say, people that really just want to get drunk or get high. If you surround yourself with, doubting Thomases and people that have a mind frame of nothing ever happens, it's good to me, that kind of thing. Or vice versa. If you surround yourself with people that are ambitious, people that are willing to go the extra mile and willing to work hard, again, that osmosis can rub off and you can change your perception. You can also change it with your own perspective, and we're going to get into perspective itself right after this break in just a second. But you actually can change your perception of the world. Attitude of gratitude is a great perspective to have, to be able to change your perception of what it is that you're living in. If you have the perception of a victim mentality, if your perspective is that of attitude of gratitude, those two things cannot coexist. They're much like water and oil. They just can't coexist. And we're going to get into perspective in just a second. But first, I want to give you a moment to think about your own perception of the world. How is it that you perceive the world? How is it that you perceive your own little part of the world? We'll be back in just about 30 seconds. And welcome back. Perception can be a strong feeling, one that can shape how you react to the world, and how you react has to do with your perspective. Here's the definition of perspective. Perspective, number one, the art or drawing solid objects on a two-dimensional surface so as to give it the right impression of their height, width, depth, position in relation to each other. A perspective drawing, right? Now that has to do with cinematography and photography and drawing and art. The second definition has to do with philosophy and ways of thinking. So perspective number two, definition number two, a particular attitude toward or way of regarding something, a point of view. Used in a sentence is, most guidebook history is written from the editor's perspective. Okay? So here we see that perspective is a point of view, or using the idea, the best way to understand things, from a singular point of view, is inside looking out. Right? So my point of view is outside. I'm looking to the outside world. And what does that outside world look like? Well, that comes from my perspective. Now, the attitude of gratitude is a great point of view to have. It allows for growth and the overcoming of trouble in life. And the way that it does that is when you have the attitude of gratitude, it's hard to feel like a victim. It's hard to feel as if everything is hopeless, and that you're just sunk and you're not going to be able to overcome whatever struggle it is that you're having, because you're so grateful for what you already have. And you look at each thing individually, each problem or each step of each problem, and you're capable of overcoming or going to the next step to be able to overcome each problem because you're grateful to have the next step. I think the best way to understand perspective is how it's basically how you view the world, right? So perspective is how you think the world views you. It's your version of how the world views you, whereas perspective is how you view the world. Now, those two things are very intertwined, and we're going to get into that in the next section here. But suffice it to say is, if you view the world in a particular way, or you view anything really in a particular way, you're going to act towards something in a particular way. That means that if I have the attitude of gratitude, most of the time, if I am grateful for every single thing around me, I think having that particular perspective is going to be a very hard mix of happy and sad. I think most of the time, if you have the attitude of gratitude, I think most of the time you're going to be at least leaning towards the side of happy, right? That attitude, as it says in the definition here, it says a particular attitude towards. So it's your attitude toward the world. So do you hate the world? Do you love the world? Do you hate people? Do you love people? Do you hate everybody except for the people that you love? Or do you love everybody except for the people that you hate? And there I'm talking about your inner core, the people, your world, let's say. Now, most people's world consists of, let's say, coworkers, friends, family, siblings, maybe, that kind of thing, kids, and then, your kids' friends and these kind of things. That's your world, really. Now, a lot of people don't like their coworkers. They don't like their job. They don't like their own family. They love their coworkers, but they hate their family. Or they love their family, but they hate their job and their coworkers. Or some people love all that stuff, and some people hate all those things. And they're just miserable. And a lot of that comes from, I believe, really not liking yourself very much. I've had that mentality a couple of times in my lifetime, so I know what that feels like. I think any self-respecting person, any person that is a thinking person, gets to a point where they recognize in themselves that I don't like either what I've become or some of the things I've done or some of these things, and it either creates a really bad, vicious self-talk inside of yourself, or it motivates you to change or to do things better, or to maybe even reconcile some of those past problems. But a lot of people live in that realm of things where they don't like their job, they don't like their neighbors, they don't like their coworkers, they don't like their entire situation, and they don't see a way out. We're going to get into a way out here in just a little while, but in how we're going to do that is we're going to understand that how these ideas both come together determines your ultimate world versus self view, or basically how you fit into the mix of things, right? Like I said, next we're going to get into some of those particular views and see how we might be able to change them if we want to. The fact is, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. You can do everything that you can for an animal, but you can't make them eat. You can try to make an animal eat. You can try to make an animal take a pill, and most of the time you can, but it's hard. It's not easy, and human beings are no different, really, in certain given situations. It's hard to get people to do the right thing. It's hard to get people to stop that negative self-talk and to start moving forward. It all begins with ourselves, and nobody can do it for you. And if you're inclined to change things, then you can. But if you're not, and you become comfortable with the hatred that you feel, or the self-loathing, or whatever it is that you're dealing with, nobody can change that for you. So it's up to you. And I think now is a good time to reflect on your own perspective. So what is your attitude towards the world? Do you hate the world? Do you love the world? What's your attitude towards yourself? Do you hate yourself? Do you love yourself? And how do these attitudes reflect back in your relationships in your life, with your coworkers, with your friends, with your family, even with yourself? How does your attitude, your perspective on all of these things reflect in your relationships? And the easiest way to see those things would be to see the actions and to see the words that are spoken. You can always tell your thoughts by, first of all, the things that you say, and second of all, the things that you do. So if you'd like to know how they reflect in your relationships, think about the things that you say and the things that you do. And we'll be back in about 30 seconds. And welcome back. Having learned the difference between perception and perspective, it's now time to put the pieces together. So let's get into the world views of 4 distinct categories of people. You have the perception, everybody hates me, and the perspective, so I hate everyone. And you have the world loves me, so I love everyone. The world hates me and I'm determined to love everyone. The world loves me, but I hate everyone. Now, we can categorize these, we can label these. I think the last one, the easiest way to label that would be probably either self-loathing or self-entitlement. But I think the first one, everybody hates me, so I hate everyone, would be something like victim mentality, these kind of things. What we're looking for is a healthy balance between these two. See, everybody hates me, so I hate everyone. Is that really true? I must admit that I have fallen into this particular trap before because a group of people did not like me in certain situations in my life. But I've come to realize it's not everybody that hates me. And I've gotten into that mentality where, okay, well, if everybody hates me, I'm just going to hate everyone. You know, screw them. If they don't like me, screw them, kind of thing. I think that's a dangerous place to be, because I don't think you're capable of truly shining in that moment. And what I mean by that is, if I am reacting to this perception, right, this perception that everybody hates me, I'm reacting to that with the perspective of, so I hate everyone. Both of those are not really true all the time. I think that's hard really to have. I don't think every single person can hate you in the world, mostly because everyone doesn't know everyone. So how can, we do make split decisions and snap judgments, but I think for the most part, people tend to at least hear you out in the first 5 minutes before they either hate you or love you. So I think to automatically assume that, what are we at? Like 7.5 billion people automatically hate you is a pretty self-absorbed idea. And then to get to the point where I hate everyone is equally self-absorbed. How can you hate everyone? You don't know everyone, right? And we could go through all this list, but the idea that these 4 paradigms or worldviews all have ties to perception and perspective. And here's the thing, they're not all right. They can't be all right. And here's the other thing, no one should live in a dark cave or with their head in the clouds. These things vary from day to day, from week to week, from month to month, from year to year, from decade to decade, from time period to time period. Right? I have a feeling that if certain person like Barack Obama were to go back into the 1940s or 50s, he probably would not be liked very much because of the idea of racism, or better yet, a better way of putting it. I don't like the term racism. I don't think it makes much sense. A better way of putting it would be prejudice toward ethnicities. Because of the predisposed prejudice toward ethnicities, Barack Obama might not be such a popular person, whereas, someone else might be, right? Decades, time periods, people come and go. I think because these things vary, you have to try to look at each situation as objective as possible and really try to understand, is it just me? Is it my own perception that's getting in the way? Either way, okay? Growing up, I had the mistaken, false perception that the world was grand and everybody was great and everybody loved me and it was so fun and I had so many friends and I had all these things. And when I grew up, I got a little older, I got a little wiser, and I recognized that I really got used by a lot of people. And recognizing that, it did put a damper on things a little bit, but it's okay to wake up to reality. It's okay to recognize people for who they are. Not everybody's great, but you can't allow, it's like overcorrection, right? If you're going off the trail or you're going into the other lane and you overcorrect, that's no better than going in the opposite lane or off the trail, right? Just because I woke up to the fact that not everybody is awesome and not everybody is on my side and trying to do things the right way, doesn't mean that I needed to overcorrect and hate everybody, right? So we can change these things, right? And we can look at things objectively and say, okay, so maybe I have a tendency to look at things as rosy-colored glasses, or maybe I have a tendency to be pessimistic. So let me correct just a little bit, but not overly, right? Now, how we change from the victim mentality or the entitlement mentality of the rosy-colored glasses is a very simple formula. I'm going to share it with you. It's hard work, not taking ourselves so seriously, being humble, in other words, and relying on something higher than ourselves. A lot of people, they rely on something that's higher than themselves, but is not necessarily worth it. Things like money or material objects or even people, whether it be spouses or children or friends or neighbors or celebrities that they want to be like, that they idolize. Whoever your hero is, you can say, or your idol is the thing that you're relying on that's higher than yourself. For me, I've asked a lot of questions and I've learned quite a bit in my lifetime. And one of the things I learned, first of all, is that, the world doesn't revolve around me. It truly doesn't. There's something that's higher than myself. Even if you look at something as simple as the government or as, your parents or, your pastor or whatever, there's always something higher than us and there's always something lower than us. We're always in the middle. Many different philosophers, including Alan Watts and I think Carl Jung, have talked about the middle way, the idea that, you're always in the middle of wherever you're at. There's always something left, right, up, down, back, front. You're always in the middle. And because of that, you always recognize that if you stay humble for both sides, right? Humble to be able to submit to the thing higher than you, and humble to take in stride the things that are lower than you, you remain content. The more that you remain that content and you stay stable, the more that you work hard, the more that you stay humble and you rely on that higher power, the easier life becomes. To wrap things up, perception and perspective can shape our existence into a blissful, unaware, false utopia, or a victimless, crimeless, poor me version of hell. And I say victimless and crimeless because most of the time, people are just going about their daily lives. They're not trying to mess you up. They're not trying to make your life a living hell. They're living their life just like you're living yours. Now, it's not always the case. There are people out there that they have nothing better to do in life than to try to make other people's life a living hell for no reason. You know, cut people off in traffic because they think it's funny or whatever it may be. But those people often that are doing that are the people that are living in that poor me version of hell that I'm talking about. They are their own worst enemies. Staying humble, working hard, being kind, and relying on something higher than ourselves will help balance things out and make for a more well-rounded, stable, productive life and productive lifestyle. And really, folks, that's what it's all about. That's what we're all striving for, is a stable, nobody likes to be way up one day and way down the next day. But at the same time, nobody likes to be dull. We all want to have the highs and lows of life. We just don't want to swing wildly from one to the other. Stability in life, whether it be mentally or physically or spiritually, is really the key of what we're all trying to achieve. That's really what we're looking for in a good life. To recognize there's going to be lows and there's going to be highs. And these things are never going to last. You're not always going to be happy. From this day forward, you're going to be happy is, as I said, a blissful, unaware, false utopia. But also to look at things as from this day forward, I'm always going to be mad or sad is really just a poor me version of hell that I don't think really anybody, if they really stop and think about it, I don't think anybody wants to live that way, right? Like I said, the way to get out of things is to stay humble and recognize there's something above you and something below you, always. There's always somebody that's better at what it is that you do, and, a lot of times can be really good because you've been doing it for a number of years, and you're better than a lot of people. But don't lord it over them, just like you wouldn't want somebody to lord it over you. Work hard at what it is that you do. Be kind to the people around you. And if you rely on something higher than yourself that's worth it, something that's actually worth it, right? Something that is perfect, something that loves you, that only wants the best for you, I've come to understand that thing is God. But relying on something higher than ourselves, I think, allows us the freedom. It lifts the burden off of being perfect. It allows us to make mistakes. It allows us to not take ourselves so seriously. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode and it has helped you in some way. In the next episode, we'll be getting into the world versus the earth. The idea that the earth is not the same as the world. The world is something that we live in. The earth is something that we live on. And we're going to get into that idea in the next episode. Be sure to subscribe for more. New episodes every Monday and Wednesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 7 p.m. Pacific. Thank you very much for listening, and may God bless you.